I stared at the text message on my phone, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped it onto the kitchen floor. "You're dead to us. Don't ever contact this family again. We never want to see your ungrateful face." The words burned into my retinas as I read them over and over, sent by my own mother at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. But it wasn't the cruelty of the message that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the message that came right after it, a screenshot from my brother's social media, showing him and my parents at a steakhouse celebrating his promotion with bottles of expensive wine. The same promotion I had helped fund by paying his rent for the past 6 months while he looked for better opportunities. If you've ever felt like the family ATM, like your worth was measured only by what you could give and never by who you were, then please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to take you through the darkest valley I've ever walked and show you how I finally found the light on the other side. Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and your own survival. Let me take you back to where this all started, back to when I was still naive enough to believe that love and sacrifice were the same thing. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia in a house that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard, worked in commercial real estate until the market crashed in 2008. My mother, Patricia, had been a stay-at-home mom who prided herself on maintaining appearances. We had the nicest lawn on the block, the Christmas lights that made neighbors stop and stare, the family portraits and matching outfits that hung in our living room like evidence of our supposed happiness. But inside that picture-perfect house, there was a hierarchy that was never explicitly stated but always understood. At the top was Emma, my older sister by 3 years. Emma had been born beautiful, the kind of baby that strangers would stop to admire in her stroller. She had our mother's delicate features and our father's piercing blue eyes, and she learned early how to use that beauty to her advantage. My mother treated Emma like a precious doll, always fussing over her hair, her clothes, her every whim. I have memories of being 5 years old, watching my mother spend an hour curling Emma's hair for her school picture, while I stood in the corner with my own hair in a messy ponytail that I'd done myself. Then there was Jake, 4 years younger than me, the miracle baby, the boy child my father had desperately wanted after 2 daughters. I remember the day my mother came home from the hospital with Jake. I was 8 years old, and I'd been so excited to be a big sister. I'd made a welcome home banner with construction paper, and markers had helped my father clean the house from top to bottom. But when my mother walked through that door, she barely glanced at my banner. All her attention, all her love, all her energy focused like a laser beam on that tiny bundle in her arms. And then there was me, Sarah, the middle child, the one born without Emma's beauty or Jake's coveted male status. The one whose purpose I learned early and thoroughly was to make everyone else's life easier. I was 6 years old the first time my mother made it clear what my role in the family would be. Emma had a dance recital, an important one, where scouts from prestigious dance academies would be watching. My mother had been preparing for weeks, having Emma's costume custom made, hiring a private coach for extra lessons. On the day of the recital, I woke up with a fever. I remember feeling like my head was stuffed with cotton, my throat raw and aching. I told my mother I didn't feel well. She pressed her hand to my forehead, frowned, and then looked at me with something in her eyes I couldn't quite name at the time. Now I recognize it as irritation, resentment, even that I would dare to be sick on Emma's important day. "You're fine," she said flatly. "Take some Tylenol. Emma's recital is in 3 hours, and I need you to help me pack her bag and keep your brother entertained while I do her hair." I spent that afternoon carrying Emma's dance bag, managing 2-year-old Jake while he cried and squirmed and trying not to throw up. At the recital, I sat in the audience shivering with fever while everyone around me clapped and cheered for Emma's perfect performance. On the drive home, my mother raved about how Emma had been the best dancer there, how the scouts had been impressed, how this was just the beginning of Emma's brilliant future. No one asked how I was feeling. The next day, when my fever spiked to 103 and my father finally took me to urgent care where I was diagnosed with strep throat, my mother's only comment was, "Well, at least you waited until after Emma's recital to get really sick." That pattern repeated itself throughout my childhood in countless variations. When I was 10, I wanted to join the school choir. I loved singing, would spend hours in my room making up songs and melodies. But choir rehearsals conflicted with the time my mother needed me to watch Jake while she took Emma to dance practice. "Sarah, don't be selfish," my mother said when I brought home the permission slip. "Your sister's dance career is important. You can sing around the house." I never joined the choir. When I was 12, I made the honor roll for the first time. I was so proud, so excited to show my parents my report card. I ran home from school, clutching it like a golden ticket burst through the front door, ready to share my achievement. My mother was in the kitchen, and when I showed her the report card, she smiled absently and said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately turning to Emma, who'd just walked in behind me. "Emma, sweetie, did you remember to grab the fabric samples for your recital costume? We need to make a decision by tonight." My moment of pride evaporated. I stood there holding my report card, the paper suddenly feeling heavy and meaningless in my hands. That night at dinner, my father asked how everyone's day was. Emma talked for 20 minutes about her upcoming recital. Jake, now 7, talked about his soccer practice. When it was my turn, I mentioned the honor roll. My father nodded and said, "Good job, kiddo," then immediately turned back to Jake to ask more about soccer. I learned to make myself small. I learned that my accomplishments were footnotes in the story of our family, that my needs were negotiable while everyone else's were absolute. I learned that love in our house was a finite resource that had already been allocated and there wasn't much left over for me. But I also learned something else. I learned that I could earn attention brief and conditional, though it might be through service. When I was 13, Emma needed a dress for her Sweet 16 party. It was expensive, well beyond what my parents had budgeted. I'd been saving money from babysitting jobs, had almost $300 tucked away in my dresser drawer. I was saving for a guitar. I'd wanted to learn to play, since Forever had found a used one at a pawn shop that I'd been visiting every week, making sure it was still there, dreaming about the day I'd have enough to buy it. My mother mentioned the dress situation at dinner one night, sighing about how Emma had her heart set on this particular designer dress, but they just couldn't afford it. I saw my opening. "I have money saved," I said. "I could help." The way my mother's face lit up, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Sarah, would you really do that? That's so generous of you. That's my girl." She actually hugged me, something she rarely did. My father patted me on the shoulder. Emma squealed and thanked me, already pulling up pictures of the dress on her phone to show me. I gave them the money the next day, all of it. The guitar stayed at the pawn shop. Eventually, someone else bought it, but I had something more valuable, or so I thought at the time. I had my mother's approval. I had been seen, acknowledged, praised. For a few shining days, I mattered. That became my drug of choice. Approval through sacrifice, acknowledgement through service, mattering by making myself useful. High school was more of the same, only the stakes got higher. Emma was applying to colleges, expensive private art schools where she planned to study dance and theater. My parents, whose financial situation had never recovered from my father's job loss, couldn't afford the tuition. But Emma couldn't possibly go to a state school. That would be beneath her talent, a waste of her potential. So they took out loans, massive loans, and when those weren't enough, they needed a cosigner with decent credit. I was 17, working 2 jobs: a cashier at a grocery store and a weekend hostess at a chain restaurant. I'd been diligent about saving, about building credit with a secured credit card I paid off religiously every month. My credit score was good, better than my parents', which had been destroyed by maxed-out cards and late payments during the years of unemployment. My father sat me down in his office one evening during my senior year. He looked tired, older than his years, and there was something in his posture that made me feel sorry for him. "Sarah, I need to ask you a favor," he started. "It's a big one. Emma needs a cosigner for her student loans. Her first-choice school accepted her full scholarship for the first year based on her audition, but we need to cover housing and subsequent years. The banks won't approve the loans with just my name. I know you're young, but your credit is good, and this would really help your sister. She's got a real shot at making it, Sarah. She could be on Broadway someday. We can't let financial stuff hold her back." I should have said no. I should have asked questions, should have consulted someone who understood finances better than I did. But I was 17, and my father was looking at me with something like respect, like I was important enough to be asked to participate in this significant family decision. "Of course," I said. "I'll do it." I signed the papers without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. I co-signed for $62,000 in private student loans for Emma to attend a performing arts school in California. $62,000 that I would discover years later had variable interest rates that would balloon the total to over $90,000 before Emma even graduated. Nobody explained to me that as a cosigner, I was equally responsible for those loans. Nobody told me that this would appear on my credit report affecting my debt-to-income ratio for any future loans I might need. Nobody mentioned that if Emma missed payments, which she would frequently do, it would damage my credit score. They certainly didn't tell me that Emma would treat those loans as free money, making the minimum payments only when it was convenient, letting them go into forbearance regularly, watching the interest compound while she posted Instagram photos from expensive restaurants and music festivals. I found out about all of this the hard way years later when I tried to buy my first car. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First came college, which was a completely different experience from Emma's. While my parents and I had toured Emma's campus, a beautiful historic place with Gothic architecture and manicured lawns, they never once offered to visit any schools with me. When I got accepted to the University of Pittsburgh with a partial academic scholarship, my mother's response was, "Well, that's practical. You can commute from home and save money." Except I couldn't commute. Not really. Not if I wanted to have any sort of college experience, any sort of life of my own. So I took out my own loans, got a dorm room, and started my freshman year with a carefully constructed budget that included working 20 hours a week at the campus library. That budget lasted exactly one semester. In January of my freshman year, my mother called. Jake, now 14, wanted to go to a winter sports camp in Vermont. It was expensive, $2,000 for a week, but all his friends were going, and he'd be heartbroken if he couldn't go. "Sarah, honey, I know you're working. Could you help with this? We just can't swing it right now, and Jake has had such a hard year." Jake's hard year consisted of getting a B in one class and not making the starting lineup on his soccer team. But I sent the money. I had to pick up extra shifts, had to skip buying textbooks for 2 of my classes, and rely on the library copies instead, but I sent the money. The thank you I got was a group text with photos from the camp and a "Thanks, Sarah" from Jake with a thumbs up emoji. Sophomore year, Emma needed money for headshots for auditions. Junior year, my parents' furnace broke and they needed help with the repair. Senior year, Emma had been cast in a small production off Broadway and needed money for rent in New York while she did the show that paid basically nothing. Every time I said yes. Every time I juggled my budget, picked up extra shifts, postponed my own needs and wants. The summer after I graduated, I landed my job in Chicago as a financial analyst. It was a good job with a decent starting salary, better than most of my classmates were getting. I was proud of myself for landing it, for making it through college, despite all the obstacles for starting what I hoped would be a successful career. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I bought furniture from IKEA, and Goodwill hung cheap prints on the walls, filled the space with plants I picked up from the farmer's market. For the first time in my life, I had a place that was entirely my own, that no one could claim or invade or ask me to share. That peace lasted 4 months. Jake had dropped out of DePaul University after 3 semesters. My parents had paid for those semesters every penny while I'd taken out loans for my own education. Jake's reason for dropping out changed, depending on who he was talking to. To my parents, it was because he wasn't being challenged, because traditional education couldn't contain his entrepreneurial spirit. To his friends, according to what I saw on social media, it was because college was a scam and he'd rather make money in the real world. The truth, which I pieced together from various sources, was that he'd failed most of his classes because he'd spent more time gaming and partying than studying, and the university had suggested he take a leave of absence to get his priorities straight. At 20, Jake moved back in with my parents and settled into their basement. He set up an elaborate gaming computer, mounted a TV on the wall, and basically created a teenage boy's paradise where he spent his days playing video games and smoking weed while occasionally talking about starting a tech company. My parents enabled this, completely bringing him meals, doing his laundry, paying for his phone and car insurance, and giving him spending money. When Jake announced he was moving to Chicago, I felt my stomach drop. I was on the phone with my mother when she told me, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "Sarah, Jake has decided he wants to be closer to the startup scene in Chicago. You know how entrepreneurial he is. He's got such great ideas. He just needs to be in the right environment to make them happen." I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones, that familiar weight of obligation settling over my shoulders. Mom, I don't think. Your apartment has 2 bedrooms, doesn't it? Jake could take that second room. It would just be temporary, just until he gets on his feet. A few months at most. You'd be helping him get started in life, Sarah. That's what family does. The second bedroom wasn't really a bedroom. It was technically a den, a small room I used as a home office and a yoga space, one of the few luxuries I'd allowed myself. But I could hear the expectation in my mother's voice, could feel the guilt already rising. What kind of sister would refuse to help her younger brother? What kind of person would be so selfish? He'd need to pay rent, I said, trying to establish at least some boundary. I can't afford to cover his share. Of course, my mother said quickly. He'll pay his share. He's very responsible about that kind of thing. That was a lie. Jake had never been responsible about anything involving money or commitment or follow-through. But I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that maybe this time would be different, that maybe Jake was actually serious about making something of himself, that maybe I could help him without destroying myself in the process. Jake moved in on a Saturday in October. My father drove him from Philadelphia in a rented truck that contained Jake's gaming setup, his massive TV, his clothes, and very little else. As we unloaded his stuff into what had been my peaceful sanctuary, my office, my yoga space, Jake walked through my apartment with the air of someone surveying a hotel room. He didn't thank me. He didn't acknowledge what I was giving up. He just pointed out where he wanted his furniture, complained that the Wi-Fi wasn't as fast as he'd hoped, and asked what I was making for dinner. That first month, I tried to establish some ground rules. We'd split rent 50-50. We'd split utilities. We'd split groceries. We'd keep common areas clean. We'd respect each other's space and schedules. Jake agreed to everything with the distracted air of someone who wasn't really listening, his eyes on his phone as he scrolled through Twitter. The first rent check never came. When I brought it up, Jake looked genuinely surprised, as if the idea of paying rent was a novel concept. Oh man, I'm sorry. I had this unexpected expense come up. My laptop needed repairs. I'll get you next month, I promise. Next month came and went. So did the month after that. Every time I brought it up, Jake had an excuse. He was between opportunities. He'd been so close to landing this freelance gig, but it fell through. His startup idea needed development work that was taking longer than expected. He'd pay me back double once things took off. Meanwhile, Jake's presence in my apartment was transforming my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. He kept vampire hours up until 4 or 5 in the morning, gaming with friends online, yelling at his screen, laughing loudly at videos. I'd lie in my bed in the next room, stuffed earplugs deep into my ears, staring at the ceiling, knowing I had to be up for work in a few hours. When I asked him to keep it down, he'd say, "Oh, sorry." And then 20 minutes later, he'd forget and the noise would start again. He left messes everywhere. Dishes piled in the sink, crusty with dried food because he'd eat and then go back to gaming without cleaning up. Empty beer bottles and takeout containers on the coffee table, the kitchen counter, even on the bathroom sink. I'd come home from work exhausted, wanting nothing more than to relax in my own home. And instead, I'd have to spend an hour cleaning up after a grown man who apparently never learned basic life skills. The groceries I bought would disappear within days. I'd go to make myself breakfast before work, and the eggs I'd bought would be gone. The milk finished, the bread reduced to a few crumbs at the bottom of the bag. When I confronted Jake about it, he shrugged. I was hungry. I thought we were sharing groceries. Sharing means you contribute too, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Sharing means you buy groceries sometimes. I don't have any money right now, he said, not even looking up from his phone. You know I'm in a tight spot. I'll get you back when my situation improves. His situation never improved, or rather his financial situation never improved, but his lifestyle certainly didn't suffer. He always seemed to have money for the things he wanted. He'd go out drinking with friends he'd made online, come home smelling of expensive craft beer and cigarettes. He'd get Uber Eats delivered several times a week, $40 orders of sushi or Thai food. He bought a new gaming headset that cost $300. But he never had money for rent or groceries or utilities. I started keeping my food in my bedroom, a mini fridge I bought and hid in my closet like some kind of trapped animal hoarding resources. I felt pathetic doing it, but it was the only way to ensure I'd have food for myself. The electric bills skyrocketed because Jake ran his gaming computer and TV and space heater 24/7. I went from spending $100 a month on utilities to spending $300, and Jake contributed nothing. When I tried to talk to my parents about it, they were dismissive. "You know Jake is going through a transitional period," my mother said. "He's trying to find himself. You remember how hard that age was. He just needs some support right now." "Mom, I'm supporting him completely. He's not paying rent, he's not buying groceries, he's running up my utility bills. I can't afford this." "Sarah, you make good money. You can handle it. Jake doesn't have your advantages. He's struggling." "I struggled too," I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. "I worked my way through college. I took out loans. Nobody handed me anything." "That's different. You've always been good with money. Jake is more creative, more artistic in his thinking. He needs different kinds of support. Besides, what kind of sister kicks her brother out? Family helps family." There it was again. Family helps family. The phrase that had governed my entire life, the unspoken rule that trumped all other considerations. My exhaustion, my financial stress, my dwindling savings, my complete lack of peace or privacy in what was supposed to be my own home. None of that mattered as much as family helping family. Around this time, Emma's situation took a turn. The off-off Broadway show had closed after a brief run, and she'd discovered that acting auditions in New York were brutal and unforgiving. She'd spent a year going to audition after audition, getting callbacks that led nowhere, surviving on the money my parents sent her, and the occasional temp job. Her social media was a carefully curated highlight reel of glamorous moments, cocktails with friends, rooftop parties, gallery openings that completely obscured the reality of her situation. What I didn't know until much later was that Emma had maxed out 3 credit cards that my mother had added her as an authorized user on. Cards that were technically in my mother's name, but that Emma had been using without any real oversight or consequences. When my mother finally discovered the extent of the debt over $15,000, she panicked. That's when I got the call from Emma herself, crying hysterically. "Sarah, I'm in so much trouble. Mom is furious. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, but everything is so expensive here, and I thought I'd be working more by now. I thought I'd be able to pay it back." "Emma, what are you talking about?" Through her tears, the story came out. The credit card debt, the threatening calls from collection agencies, the fact that our parents couldn't afford to pay it off and were going to have to declare bankruptcy if someone didn't help. "I need $10,000, Emma said. "If I can pay off the worst of it, Mom can make minimum payments on the rest. Please, Sarah. I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who has money. If you don't help me, you're destroying our parents' credit. You're destroying their future. Is that what you want?" The manipulation was so naked, so obvious, but it still worked. I didn't have $10,000 in my checking account, not with Jake draining my resources month after month. But I had it in my savings, the emergency fund I'd been building since I got my job, the safety net I'd created for myself in case of job loss or medical emergency or any of the 100 catastrophes that could befall a young woman living alone in a big city. I transferred $8,000 to Emma's account. It was all I could afford without completely depleting my savings. I told myself it was a loan that Emma would pay me back, that this was a one-time emergency. Emma promised through her tears that she'd pay me back, that she'd get a better job, that she'd learned her lesson about spending. 3 weeks later, Emma posted pictures on Instagram from a weekend trip to the Hamptons with friends. I sat in my bedroom staring at those photos on my phone. Emma laughing on a beach. Emma holding a glass of wine at some beachside restaurant. Emma looking carefree and beautiful and completely unburdened, and I felt something inside me start to crack. Not a dramatic break, just a tiny fissure, the first sign that maybe the foundation I'd been building my life on wasn't as solid as I'd thought. But I pushed the feeling away. I told myself that Emma deserved to have fun. Sometimes that one weekend didn't mean anything, that I shouldn't be so petty and judgmental. I went back to work, back to coming home to a messy apartment and a brother who treated me like a combination ATM and maid service, back to the grind of trying to keep my head above water while everyone around me acted like I was swimming in a pool of money. Then came Thanksgiving. My mother called in early November with the annual invitation to come home for the holiday. "We're so excited to see you, sweetie. Emma is flying in from New York, and of course Jake will come with you from Chicago. It'll be wonderful to have everyone together. I told her I'd be there, though the thought of driving 3 hours with Jake complaining the whole way made me want to fake a work emergency. But I went because that's what I did. I went and I smiled and I pretended everything was fine. The house looked shabbier than I remembered. My parents had clearly been struggling financially, though they tried to hide it. The paint was peeling on the shutters. The roof looked like it needed repairs. Inside furniture that had been nice 20 years ago was now worn and faded. But my mother had still gone all out for Thanksgiving, had cooked enough food for an army, had set the table with the good china that only came out for holidays. Emma arrived looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, wearing an outfit that I knew cost more than my entire month's rent. She air-kissed everyone, exclaimed about how cute the house looked, how nostalgic it all was. Jake immediately disappeared to the basement to show his friends back home his latest gaming setup over video call. I helped my mother in the kitchen while my father and Emma caught up in the living room. My mother was stressed, snapping at me when I asked where she kept the serving dishes, clearly overwhelmed by all the cooking she'd insisted on doing. "Sarah, for heaven's sake, they're in the same place they've always been. I don't know why you can't remember these things." At dinner, the pattern was familiar and exhausting. My father said grace, thanking God for bringing the family together for the food on the table, for the blessings we'd received. Then my mother started her interrogation of Emma and Jake, her voice warm and interested, asking about their lives, their dreams, their plans. Emma talked about her art, about how she was working on a one-woman show that she was going to perform in a tiny black box theater in Brooklyn. It was going to be deeply personal, she said, exploring themes of identity and family and the price of pursuing your dreams. My mother hung on every word, asking questions, offering encouragement. Jake talked about his latest startup idea. He'd been working with some developers he'd met online, and they were building an app that would revolutionize the way people connect with service providers. It was going to be huge, he said. They just needed to secure funding, and then they'd be able to launch and start making real money. My father nodded along, told Jake he was proud of him for following his entrepreneurial instincts, for not being afraid to take risks. When the attention finally turned to me, I mentioned my promotion. "I'm managing a small team now," I said, trying not to sound too proud, too eager for recognition. "It's a significant pay increase, and I'm really excited about the new responsibilities." My mother looked up from her plate, smiled briefly, and said, "That's nice, dear." Then she immediately turned back to Emma. "So, tell me more about this one-woman show. Have you started writing the script?" That was it. That was the sum total of my family's interest in my achievement. Something I'd worked toward for years, something that represented real growth in my career. Something that actually mattered, merited less attention than Emma's vague plans for a show that might never happen. After dinner, while Emma and Jake and my father watched football in the living room, I helped my mother clean up in the kitchen. She was washing dishes and I was drying them, and for a few minutes we worked in companionable silence. Then she brought it up. "Sarah, your father and I are having some financial difficulties." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming. "What kind of difficulties?" "Well, you know, business has been slow for your father, and with the house getting older, things keep breaking. We just had to replace the water heater, and that was $3,000 right there. And then there's the property tax, which is due next month. We're short about $2,000. I kept drying the dish in my hands, focusing on the repetitive motion, trying to calculate in my head whether I had $2,000 to spare after everything I'd already given away. "Mom, I just gave Emma $8,000. My mother's hands stilled in the sudsy water. When she spoke, her voice was cold. "That was Emma's emergency. This is ours. Are you saying you're going to help your sister but not your own parents?" "No, I'm saying I don't have unlimited money. I have expenses too. Jake isn't paying rent. My savings are basically gone. I'm barely getting by myself." My mother pulled her hands out of the water and turned to face me. Her expression was hard, disappointed, the look she'd give me when I'd failed to meet some expectation I didn't know I was supposed to fulfill. "Sarah, I have to say I'm disappointed. We raised you to value family. We gave you everything growing up. We sacrificed so much for you kids. And now, when we need help, when we need our children to step up, you're telling me you can't spare $2,000. You make good money. You got that promotion. I know you have the money. You're just being selfish." The word hit me like a slap. Selfish. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd gone without so that everyone else in this family could have what they wanted, I was selfish. I'll see what I can do. I heard myself say the words coming out automatically, robotically. My mother's face softened immediately, the warmth flooding back. Thank you, sweetie. I knew we could count on you. You've always been our responsible one. I wrote the check that night before I left. $2,000 I didn't really have. I'd have to use my credit card for my own bills that month, would have to start carrying a balance for the first time in my adult life. But I wrote the check because that's what I did. That's who I was. The drive back to Chicago the next day was silent. Jake slept most of the way, occasionally waking to complain about being hungry or needing to stop for bathroom breaks. I drove in a fog of exhaustion and something else, something darker that I couldn't quite name. That tiny crack I'd felt after Emma's Hamptons trip had widened. Something was shifting inside me, but I didn't know what yet. December arrived, and with it came the announcement that my parents were planning a family trip to celebrate my father's 70th birthday. They were renting a beach house in Destin, Florida for a week in January. The email my mother sent had all the details, the dates, the address of the rental house, the activities they had planned. What the email didn't include was any information about my accommodations. It detailed the sleeping arrangements for everyone else. My parents in the master bedroom, Emma in one guest room, Jake in another, but I wasn't mentioned. When I called to ask about it, my mother sounded annoyed that I'd even brought it up. Well, Sarah, the house only has 3 bedrooms. We assumed you'd either stay somewhere nearby and drive over during the days, or you could sleep on the couch in the living room if you wanted to stay with us. You assumed I'd pay for my own hotel while everyone else gets a bedroom. You make more money than anyone else in the family. You can afford it. Besides, you're the only one without a spouse or kids. You don't need as much space. The casual dismissal of my needs, the assumption that my greater earning power meant I deserved less consideration, made that crack inside me widen a little more. How much is the rental house? $3,500 for the week, but your father and I are covering it. Well, mostly. Emma is chipping in $500, and Jake said he'd help out when he could. So my parents were spending $3,500. Emma was contributing $500. Jake was contributing his usual nothing, and I wasn't invited to contribute or even mentioned in the planning, but I was expected to pay for my own separate accommodation if I wanted to join the family celebration. I don't think I can make it, I said. I have a project at work that's going to keep me busy in January. Oh, my mother sounded more relieved than disappointed. Well, if work is demanding, we understand. We'll miss you, though. Make sure you send your father a nice birthday card. I did not in the end send a birthday card. I spent that week in January working, yes, but also scrolling through the photos my family posted on social media. Emma in a bikini on the beach. Jake doing a cannonball into the pool. My parents looking happy and relaxed, my father with his arm around my mother, both of them smiling at the camera. A beautiful family portrait, complete and whole, missing nothing. Missing me. I sat in my apartment on the evening of my father's birthday, looking at those photos, and I cried. Not the dramatic sobbing of acute grief, but the quiet, hopeless tears of someone who's finally understanding a truth they've been avoiding. I didn't matter to my family. Not really. I mattered as a resource, as a solution to their problems, as the reliable one who could be counted on to sacrifice and serve. But as a person, as someone with needs and feelings and dreams of my own, I was invisible. That realization sat heavy in my chest, but I still didn't act on it. I went back to work. I came home to Jake's messes. I transferred money when people asked. I kept the machine running. But the crack kept growing. In February, on a Friday evening after a particularly brutal week at work, I came home to find Jake and 3 of his friends in my living room. The air was thick with the smell of weed. There were pizza boxes everywhere, beer bottles crowding the coffee table ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. The TV was blaring and the guys were shouting at the screen deep into some multiplayer game. I stood in the doorway of my own apartment, keys in hand, looking at this scene. Jake glanced up, saw me, and waved casually. Hey, Sarah, we're just hanging out. Want to order Chinese? We're thinking about getting some later. Something in me snapped. Not the hairline crack widening, this was different. This was the moment when you realize that the thing you've been trying to preserve isn't worth preserving anymore. Everyone needs to leave, I said. Jake laughed, thinking I was joking. Come on, don't be uptight. We're just having fun. I have a presentation Monday morning that I need to prepare for. I need peace and quiet. Everyone needs to leave. Now. One of Jake's friends stood up uncomfortable with the tension. Yeah, man, maybe we should. No, it's cool, Jake interrupted. Sarah's just stressed from work. She'll chill out. He looked at me, his expression somewhere between dismissive and annoyed. Just go to your room if you need quiet. We'll keep it down. This is my apartment, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I pay all the rent. I pay all the utilities. I buy all the food. And you're telling me to go to my room while you and your friends trash my living space and smoke weed that could get me evicted? Jesus, Sarah, it's just a little pot. Don't be so dramatic. Get out! Something in my voice must have finally registered because Jake's friends started gathering their things, muttering goodbyes, filing out the door. Jake stayed on the couch, arms crossed, sulking like a teenager who'd been told to clean his room. After his friends left, we had the fight I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I told him he had 30 days to find a new place. He said I was being ridiculous, that I was overreacting, that I was a terrible sister. I stood my ground. He called our parents, put them on speakerphone, and they both started yelling at me about family obligations, and how could I do this to my baby brother, and didn't I have any compassion? He's not a baby, I said into the phone, my voice shaking but firm. He's 22 years old. He's a grown man who needs to take care of himself. I can't do this anymore. Sarah, if you kick your brother out, there will be consequences, my mother said, her voice icy with threat. You'll be choosing money over family. We'll know exactly what kind of person you are. You already know what kind of person I am, I replied. I'm the kind who gives everyone everything they ask for and gets nothing in return. I'm done being that person. I hung up the phone and Jake stormed off to his room, slamming the door hard enough that picture frames rattled on the walls. The next day, I consulted with Marcus over coffee. He'd been my friend since college, one of the few people in my life who saw me clearly, who called me out when I was making destructive choices, who loved me enough to tell me the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. You should have kicked him out 2 years ago, Marcus said bluntly. Sarah, you're killing yourself for people who don't appreciate you. I've watched you get thinner and more exhausted and more miserable, and for what? So your brother can play video games rent-free. I just feel like I owe them. Like they're my family. I'm supposed to help. Help is one thing. This isn't help. This is enabling, and it's destroying you. I spent the weekend researching tenant laws in Illinois. What I discovered was that because Jake had never signed a lease, never paid rent consistently, and had been explicitly told his stay was temporary, he was considered a guest rather than a tenant. That meant I could ask him to leave with reasonable notice, which I'd already provided, and if he refused, I could legally remove his belongings. The month that followed was the worst of my life up to that point. Jake was vindictive in his refusal to leave. He blasted music at all hours, knowing I had early morning meetings. He invited more people over parties that went until dawn. He stopped doing any pretense of cleaning up after himself. He was punishing me, trying to make staying in my own apartment so unbearable that I'd give up and let him stay. My parents called constantly, taking turns berating me. My father would call in the mornings before work, his voice heavy with disappointment, telling me I was breaking his heart, that he'd raised me better than this. My mother would call at night, her voice sharp with accusations, telling me I was destroying the family, that I was selfish and cruel and heartless. Emma sent a long text message that started with, I'm so disappointed in you, and ended with, blood is supposed to mean something. She CC'd our parents on it, making sure they saw her loyalty, her solidarity with them against the black sheep daughter who dared to have boundaries. I blocked them all. Every single one of them. I blocked their numbers, blocked them on social media, blocked their emails. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. On the 31st day, when Jake still hadn't packed a single box, I came home from work with Marcus and another friend, both large men who'd agreed to help me. We packed all of Jake's belongings efficiently and without ceremony. His gaming computer, his TV, his clothes, his collection of empty energy drink cans, and dirty dishes. We loaded everything into my car and Marcus's truck. Then we drove to my parents' house in Philadelphia. It took 3 hours and we arrived just as it was getting dark. I rang the doorbell with my heart hammering in my chest, knowing this was the point of no return, knowing that whatever happened next would define the rest of my relationship with my family. My mother opened the door. Behind her, I could see my father in his recliner, the TV on the picture of comfortable retirement. My mother looked at me then at the boxes and suitcases behind me, and her face transformed into something ugly with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? Jake is your son, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He's your responsibility now. I can't take care of him anymore. If you leave his stuff here, if you do this, Sarah, you're done. You hear me? You're done with this family. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. I saw the lines of stress around her mouth, the gray in her hair. She no longer bothered to dye the tiredness in her eyes. I saw a woman who'd built her identity around her children, who'd made her favorite and her least favorite clear from the beginning, who'd taught me that love was something you had to earn and could lose at any moment. I know, I said quietly. I'm okay with that. The look on her face was one I'll never forget. Shock rage, and underneath it all, something that might have been fear. The realization that I'd called her bluff, that her threats had no power anymore, that I was choosing myself over her approval. My father appeared in the doorway, then standing behind my mother. Sarah, you don't mean that. Come inside. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I've spent my entire life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I'm done. I'm so done. So I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard my mother start to cry dramatic sobs that were probably meant to make me turn around, to make me feel guilty enough to come back and apologize and take it all back. I didn't turn around. Marcus and his friend unloaded Jake's belongings onto the front porch. My father stood there watching, not helping, not protesting, just watching with an expression I couldn't read. When the last box was placed, Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. You ready? I was. I was so ready. We drove back to Chicago through the night. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 29 years and had finally exhaled. When I got home, my phone was exploding with messages. I glanced at the lock screen long enough to see they were from family members, from my parents, from Emma, from Jake. I turned my phone off completely and didn't turn it back on for 3 days. When I finally powered it up again, I found 73 missed calls, 46 text messages, and 12 voicemails. I deleted all of them without reading or listening to any. Then I blocked every number that wasn't Marcus or David or my boss. The message that started this story, the one from my mother telling me I was dead to them, came a week later. She must have used a friend's phone or gotten a new number because it got through my blocks. I stared at it for a long time, reading those words over and over. You're dead to us. And then, for the first time, I felt relief, because if I was dead to them, they were dead to me too. The obligation was over. The performance was finished. I could stop trying to earn something they were never going to give. The weeks that followed were a kaleidoscope of emotions. Some days, I felt light-free, like I'd been released from prison. Other days, I felt crushing guilt, wondering if I'd overreacted, if I should apologize, if I should try one more time. I started therapy on Marcus's recommendation, finding a counselor named Dr. Morrison who specialized in family dynamics and toxic relationships. Tell me about your family, Dr. Morrison said in our first session. I told her everything. Every memory, every slight, every time I'd given money or time or energy and received nothing but expectations for more. I told her about feeling invisible, about the crack that had grown into a chasm, about the night I'd finally walked away. When I finished, Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Sarah, what you've described isn't love. Love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. That sentence changed everything. It gave me a framework, a way to understand what had happened to me that wasn't my fault, that wasn't about me being wrong or bad or selfish. I'd been in a toxic family system where I'd been assigned the role of caretaker and scapegoat, where my value was entirely contingent on what I could provide. Over the following months, therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Morrison helped me understand concepts like enmeshment, parentification, and the golden child scapegoat dynamic. She helped me see that my family's treatment of me wasn't about my worth as a person, but about their dysfunction as a system. She helped me understand that choosing to protect myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. I learned about boundaries, real boundaries, not the weak ones I'd tried to set before. I learned that no was a complete sentence, that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting my well-being. I learned about the concept of the missing stair, the person in a family or social group whose bad behavior everyone works around instead of addressing. I realized I'd been the person working around all the missing stairs in my family, exhausting myself to compensate for everyone else's dysfunction. I also learned about financial abuse. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that what my family had done, pressuring me to co-sign loans, expecting me to support adult siblings, making me feel guilty for having money, was a form of abuse. It was using financial coercion to control and exploit me. With Dr. Morrison's help, I contacted a financial advisor to assess the damage. The student loans I'd co-signed for Emma were in forbearance, again, interest piling up. My credit score had dropped 40 points. The advisor helped me understand my options. I couldn't get my name off the loans without Emma refinancing them on her own, which was unlikely given her spotty employment history. But I could at least stop contributing to new financial entanglements. The advisor also helped me create a real budget, one that accounted only for my expenses, not everyone else's. Without Jake draining my resources, without Emma's emergencies, without my parents' constant requests, I had an extra $1,200 a month. $1,200 that had been going to support other adults who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves. I started rebuilding my savings. I paid off the credit cards I'd been carrying balances on. I increased my retirement contributions. For the first time in my adult life, I felt financially secure. But more than the financial relief, it was the emotional space that transformed me. I started saying yes to things I'd always refused because I was too busy being everyone else's safety net. When Marcus invited me to a pottery class, I went. I was terrible at it, made lopsided bowls that looked like abstract art projects, but I laughed more in those 2 hours than I had in months. I joined a book club with colleagues from work. We met once a month at a wine bar discussing novels and drinking overpriced Chardonnay and gossiping about office politics. It was normal and boring and wonderful. I started running in the mornings, not to lose weight or punish my body, but because I liked the feeling of my feet hitting the pavement, liked the rhythm of my breath, liked the way the city looked in the early morning light when it was still quiet and peaceful. I began to discover who I was outside of my role as family caretaker. I discovered that I loved hiking, spending hours in forest preserves and state parks, feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. I discovered that I had a creative side I'd never explored. Started keeping a journal where I wrote poetry and short stories, terrible amateur stuff, but it was mine and that made it valuable. 6 months after cutting contact, I met David. He was a graphic designer brought in for a consultation on a rebranding project at my company. During a coffee break in the meeting, we started talking about a book we'd both read, and the conversation was so easy, so natural, that when the meeting ended, he asked if I'd like to grab dinner sometime. I said yes, and that dinner turned into another dinner, and then coffee dates and weekend hikes and lazy Sunday mornings and all the things that make up the beginning of something real. David was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was kind in a way that felt foreign to me, kind without expecting anything in return. He remembered small details like how I took my coffee and which hiking trails I wanted to try. He never asked me for money, never expected me to solve his problems, never made me feel like my value was contingent on what I could do for him. One evening, about 3 months into dating, I told him about my family. We were cooking dinner together at my apartment, his place he'd laughingly called it when he saw how much cleaner and more peaceful it was than before, and I just started talking. I told him everything, the whole ugly story. When I finished, David was quiet for a moment. Then he put down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables, wiped his hands on a towel, and pulled me into a hug. "That sounds incredibly painful," he said into my hair. "I'm so sorry you went through that." He didn't tell me I should forgive them. He didn't tell me blood is thicker than water or family is everything. He just held me and let me feel what I was feeling without trying to fix it or minimize it or explain it away. That was the moment I knew I was falling in love with him. Life settled into a new normal. Work was going well. I got another promotion, was managing a larger team, making more money. My friendships deepened now that I had the time and energy to invest in them. My relationship with David grew stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and codependency. I was happy, simply genuinely happy, and that happiness made me realize how miserable I'd been before. A year after cutting contact, I got the LinkedIn message from Emma. I almost missed it. LinkedIn was the one platform I hadn't blocked anyone on because I needed it for professional networking, and apparently Emma had figured that out. The message was long and rambling. It started with how much she missed me, how unfair I'd been to just cut everyone off without warning, as if the years of exploitation hadn't been warning enough. It talked about how hurt everyone was, how I'd damaged the family, how I'd abandoned them in their time of need. And then buried in the middle of all that guilt tripping was the real reason for her message. The gallery show had fallen through. She'd lost her job. She was behind on rent facing eviction, and could I please help? Just this once she'd pay me back. She promised she really meant it this time. I read the message 3 times. The old Sarah, the people-pleasing Sarah, felt that familiar pull. The urge to fix, to save, to make it better. But that Sarah was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned the hard way that helping people who refuse to help themselves isn't kindness, it's enabling. I didn't respond. I archived the message and blocked Emma on LinkedIn too. That night I told Dr. Morrison about it in our session. "How does it feel?" she asked. Not responding, I mean. "It feels like freedom," I said, and I meant it. Not everything was perfect, of course. Healing isn't linear. Some days were harder than others. I had moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I'd overreacted, whether I should reach out, whether family really was worth one more try. I had nightmares, sometimes dreams, where my mother's voice was telling me I was selfish, and I'd wake up with anxiety clawing at my chest. I had moments of profound grief, not for the family I'd left, but for the family I'd never had, the mother who couldn't love me without conditions, the siblings who saw me as a resource rather than a person. But I also had something I'd never had before. I had peace. I had a life that belonged to me, shaped by my choices, my values, my dreams. I had relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. I had savings in the bank and plans for the future. 2 years after cutting contact, David and I got engaged. We decided to have a small wedding, just close friends, none of the extended family drama that had defined so much of my life. Marcus was my best person, and he gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about watching me transform from someone who was disappearing under the weight of others' expectations into someone who was fully, vibrantly alive. I didn't invite my family. Part of me wondered if I should, if a wedding might be the olive branch that could start healing. But Dr. Morrison helped me understand that reconciliation requires 2 willing parties, and my family had never acknowledged their part in our dysfunction. They still saw me as the villain, and I couldn't set myself on fire to warm them ever again. On my wedding day, as I stood in front of our friends and promised to love and honor David, I felt my mother's absence like a physical thing. But I also felt relief. This day was joyful, uncomplicated, free from the tension and drama that had colored every family gathering I'd ever attended. This was the life I'd chosen, and it was beautiful. 3 years into my healing journey, something unexpected happened. I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words, "Sarah, please talk." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Then curiosity got the better of me. Who is this? It's Jake. My first instinct was to block the number immediately, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the brevity of the message, so different from the manipulative guilt tripping I'd come to expect from my family. Maybe it was the fact that it had been 3 years and I was in a different place, emotionally strong enough to risk a conversation. "What do you want?" "To apologize, not over text, in person if you'll let me. I'm not asking for money or anything else, just a chance to say I'm sorry." I talked about it with Dr. Morrison for 2 sessions before deciding. We role-played different scenarios, established boundaries, created an exit strategy. Finally, I agreed to meet Jake for coffee. Public place daytime, David, waiting in the car outside in case I needed rescue. Jake looked different when I saw him. Older, yes, but also thinner, more tired, less of the cocky entitlement that had defined him. We sat across from each other at a Starbucks, awkward and uncertain. "Thank you for meeting me," he started. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't. What do you want, Jake?" He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but full of emotion. "I want to tell you I'm sorry. For everything. For using you, for taking advantage of you, for treating you like a bank account in a free hotel, for never thanking you or appreciating what you did for me. I was a terrible brother, and I'm sorry." I felt tears welling up. These were words I'd never expected to hear from anyone in my family. Why now? Because I finally got help. I spent the last year in rehab. I was addicted to pills and alcohol. My life fell apart completely. Lost jobs, relationships, ended up on Mom and Dad's couch for a while until they kicked me out too. Hit rock bottom. Finally got into a treatment program. He told me about his recovery, about the therapy he was doing, about how he was working a regular job now at a comic book store. Nothing fancy, but steady. Paying his own bills for the first time in his life. He told me about the 12 steps, about how making amends was part of his recovery, but that this wasn't just about checking a box. He genuinely saw now what he'd done, what we'd all done. "The thing is," Jake said, looking down at his coffee cup, "in therapy they made me really look at my patterns, and I started to see how the whole family worked. Emma was the golden child. I was the baby who could do no wrong, and you were the one who was supposed to take care of everyone. Mom and Dad set that up from the beginning. They taught us that you existed to serve us, and we believed it. I believed it, and I'm so sorry." We talked for 2 hours. Jake was honest about his struggles, about how hard recovery was, about how he was rebuilding his life one day at a time. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted me to know that he saw me now, really saw me, and understood what he'd taken from me. When we said goodbye, Jake asked if we could maybe do this again sometime. "I'm not asking for a relationship like before," he said quickly. "I know that's not possible. I know I destroyed that. But maybe someday we could have coffee occasionally. I'd like to show you that I'm different now. I'd like to earn your trust back if that's even possible." I told him I'd think about it, and I did think about it for weeks, talking it through with Dr. Morrison, with David, with Marcus. Eventually, I agreed to occasional coffee meetings, always in public, always with boundaries clearly established. Jake and I would never be close the way siblings maybe should be. Too much damage had been done, too much trust had been broken. But we could be cordial, we could be respectful, we could have a relationship that didn't require me to sacrifice myself. My parents never apologized. Emma never apologized. In fact, I heard through Jake that they'd only become more entrenched in their narrative, telling anyone who'd listen that I was mentally ill, unstable, that I'd always had problems, that they'd tried everything to help me, but I'd rejected them. It hurt knowing that my family had rewritten history to make themselves the victims and me the villain. But I also knew I couldn't control their narrative. I could only control my own story, my own truth. 4 years after cutting contact, David and I bought a house. Nothing fancy, a small 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood with a yard that needed work and a kitchen that was stuck in the 1970s. But it was ours. We painted the walls colors we loved, planted a garden in the backyard, hung artwork that made us happy. On moving day, as I unpacked boxes in our bedroom, I found an old photo album I'd forgotten I had. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and flipped through pictures of my childhood. There I was, at 8, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a science fair trophy. There I was at 13, awkward, with braces at my first school dance. There I was at 16, in my cap and gown at high school graduation. I looked at that little girl in those photos, and I felt overwhelming compassion for her. She was trying so hard to be good enough to be worthy of love. She didn't know yet that she already was worthy, that she didn't need to earn something that should have been freely given. "You okay?" David appeared in the doorway, concerned by my silence. I closed the album and smiled, meaning it completely. "Yeah, I'm better than okay. I'm free. Today, I live a life I barely could have imagined 5 years ago. I have a career, I'm proud of a partner who loves me unconditionally, friends who respect my boundaries, and a sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on how much I can give to others. I have savings that are actually growing. I have hobbies and interests and dreams that are mine alone. I have peace, real peace, the kind that comes from living authentically instead of performing for an audience that never appreciated the show. Do I sometimes feel sad about losing my family? Yes. Do I sometimes wonder what might have been if they'd been capable of loving me the way I needed? Of course. Do I sometimes feel that old guilt trying to creep back in? Absolutely. But I've learned that I can feel all of those things and still know I made the right choice. Both things can be true. I can grieve the family I deserved and celebrate the life I've built. I share this story not because I think everyone should cut contact with their families, but because I want anyone out there who feels trapped, who feels like they're drowning under the weight of everyone else's needs, who feels like their only value is what they can provide, to know that there's another way. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to earn love through endless sacrifice. You don't have to accept crumbs and call it a feast. You are worthy exactly as you are. Your needs matter. Your dreams matter. You matter not because of what you can do for others, but because you exist, because you're human, because you deserve dignity and respect and love that doesn't come with conditions attached. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. It's the foundation of every good thing that comes after. Because you can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't love anyone well, including yourself, if you're running on fumes and guilt and the desperate hope that maybe if you just give a little more sacrifice, a little more, suffer a little more, they'll finally see your worth. They won't, because people who only value you for what you can give them don't actually see you at all. They see a resource. They see a means to an end. They see a solution to their problems. But they don't see you, the whole messy, beautiful, complicated human you, and you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can do. You deserve peace. You deserve joy. You deserve a life that belongs to you. If you're in a situation like I was, please know that it's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to say no. It's okay to walk away from relationships that are hurting you, even if those relationships are with family. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to abuse or exploit you. Love shouldn't require you to disappear. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do. There will be guilt and grief and loneliness and doubt. There will be people who don't understand, who judge you, who believe the narrative that paints you as the villain. But on the other side of that pain is something precious. Freedom. Yourself. A life that's truly yours. And that life is worth fighting for. So here's my question for you. Have you ever felt like you were giving everything to people who gave nothing back? Have you ever felt like your worth was measured only by what you could sacrifice? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty to others and survival of yourself? Drop a comment below and share your story. You're not alone. There are so many of us out there who understand, who've walked this path, who've made it to the other side. And if you found value in my story, if it resonated with something in your own life, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and it helps build a community of people who understand that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are. You.